The one thing that kind of resonates with me is, man, we're starting to get to a place where on the battlefield, and there's not too many places that we're going to be able to hide. And you kind of get into Kevin's side, whether you look at the electromagnetic spectrum, our ability to saturate, and our adversaries' ability to saturate with sensors. How do we survive now on the battlefield?
This is All Quiet on the Second Front, a podcast where boring conversations around defense tech and national security come to die. Join me, Tyler Sweatt, and my Second Front comrades as we dismantle the mundane and cut through the bureaucratic BS to demystify the world of defense tech. But be warned, this is not a typical government podcast. Ready to get weird?
All right, what's up, everybody? I'm your host, Tyler Sweatt. Welcome to another episode of All Quiet on the Second Front, the podcast where boring defense talk goes to die. Really excited to kind of go back to where it all began today with what a small subset of mediocre soccer players will know as the pit, which was a subsection of the goalkeeping sort of armada we had at Army Soccer in the early 2000s. So really excited to be joined by Tyler, Donnell, and Kevin Larrabee today. And fellas, it's good to have the band together here.
No, great, Tyler. Thanks for having me, Tyler.
Heck yeah. So kind of start off before we dig into it, do a little bit of kind of like, who are you? What have you been up to? You know, where are you in your career? What are you working on? We'll start with Tyler and then we'll go to Kevin.
Thanks, Tyler. And I guess I have to start with these views on myself don't represent the U.S. Army, as I'm still one of the two of us that are in uniform here. But hit 22 years of active service here on the 1st of June as a field artillery officer. During this time, I've spent 39 months in Iraq and over 9 years now, or soon to be over 9 years outside the U.S., working with allies and partners from South Korea, Germany, and NATO. And now Canada. And so I'm just wrapping up my year at Queen's University, where I've been a visiting defense fellow as part of my Army War College experience, working at the Center for International Defense Policy. I'm actually the 43rd American colonel coming through this position all the way back to 1983, and allows us to expand outside of our military education system and see how the next generation and academics are thinking through some of these problem sets. Then next, I'm heading to staying here in Kingston, Ontario, Canada, with the Canadian Army Doctrine and Training Center, where I'll be the American deputy to the 2-star, and then fortunate enough for summer of 25 to be picked up for brigade command and the Army capabilities manager at Fire Cell, targeting back at beautiful Fort Sill, Oklahoma. And so not often in your career do you have the next 3 years mapped out for you, but that's where the family finds itself now, and excited for the conversation here, Tyler.
Heck yeah, heck of a career, brother. So following in those big shoes, Kevin, what are you up to?
Wow, it's great to be here, Tyler. Thanks for having me. It is hard to come in after Tyler, but no, great to see you guys. Great to have the pit all united again. Goalkeeping, family is so tight, and it's great to see you guys and be with you today. So I'm just retiring from the Army after 21 years of service. The last 6 years, I've been a chief data officer. I've been a senior data scientist. I've really kind of been a hands-on guy, but have evolved in my role with the USASOC Research and Development Organization, really kind of getting after all things, digital transformation. We're building software, building machine learning algorithms, building all kinds of different applications to help the warfighter, increase operational flexibility, reduce risk, and really getting after it. So that's been really the last 6 years. My career after West Point was kind of a journey. Really, was an artilleryman. I transitioned to what is now called operations research, but really as a data scientist in 2013. Tyler and I were actually next door neighbors at Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey. And from there, went to Army staff and went to CENTCOM and doing wargaming and modeling and simulation. And then 2018 got to come back up to DC and really take on more of a data science role. So excited to jump in. I just left active duty service and am now the head of product at DataShapes AI, which is the AI startup looking at the RF spectrum and how do we dominate in that space.
I think and both of your careers have been really interesting overlays of, more, I say traditional, but like the traditional sort of like post 9/11 GWAT, kind of what that looks like. And then you each took unique paths, Kev sort of into the data science Orsa and more of like a special operations community. Tyler up into the sort of senior policy, international partners and allies, and sort of, broader security cooperation. Um, I'd be curious, sort of, as you look at where we are now and where we started, kind of when we graduated, reflecting on sort of the change we've seen in, the operational environment in sort of a limited construct, and then that broader sort of like geopolitical reality. Um, and for those listening, sort of trying to frame it this way to give that perspective of folks who've had, a ton of experience throughout and sort of understanding that temporal aspect of it and how fast and slow some things change. I think it is something we don't take advantage of really asking about as we're in different vantage points in the career. And we'll go Tyler, and then, because I think you're way smarter, and then we'll go to Kev.
That's the first time I've ever been called smarter, and it's been very interesting over the last 22 years. And Tyler, listening to some of your last couple of podcasts, and the concept of borrowing your translator's cell phone so you could talk from the hilltops in Afghanistan, and where we saw similar in Iraq, where sometimes successful days you could just get your radio up and talk into your higher, your lower, and those to your left and to your right. And to me, I mean, we're not always beyond those problem sets yet. And so coming from the Joint Multinational Readiness Center 2 years prior, where I was a senior fires OCT there, we saw the same problem, especially at a multinational interoperability standpoint. Of, man, now we put this coalition together with allies and partners. And now we're back to hey, how do we make sure that everyone's on the same load set so we can get their radios to talk to each other, so they're talking left, right, up and down. And so some of that stuff, those basics of shoot, move, and communicate haven't left us, and I don't think they're ever going to leave us. And some of the things that I'm hoping to continue to see is, man, how do we use some of this technology just to make some of this easier, especially when it comes from a multinational interoperability perspective. I think as we looked at the transition and transitioning, and some of the things that we're seeing come out of Ukraine lessons learned, some of the things coming out of what we're doing with Project Convergence and Capstone, the one thing that kind of resonates with me is, man, we're starting to get to a place where on the battlefield, and there's not too many places that we're going to be able to hide, and kind of get into Kevin's side. Whether you look at the electromagnetic spectrum, our ability to saturate, and our adversaries' ability to saturate with sensors, how do we survive now on the battlefield? So shoot, move, communicate to survive, and to survive with everything that's out there now. So again, back when we first started, man, you threw up some camo netting, and you felt like you were pretty good from being able to get observed from the enemy perspective. But now what we're seeing with some of these online videos and everything else, it's one heck of a problem to solve there when it comes to the survivability aspect. And again, that's why we got smart folks like you out there helping us all survive and stay alive.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point on, how some of the problems sort of change but stay the same, right? Like, how do we establish just good lines of communication? How do we ensure that, like, we trust the sensors that we're getting sort of feedback from? And how do we remain sort of adaptable to a seemingly forever fluid kind of operational environment? Kev, would be curious to hear, same sort of take, but recognizing that, as Tyler went into that sort of like interoperability side, you in on that sort of not just the data science, but the sort of making sense of the noise and the spectrum dominance control, lack thereof, kind of how that plays in as well.
Yeah, no doubt. No, I think Tyler definitely hit a bunch of points there. I think as we think about our kind of platoon leader time, our 2004 to 2008 period, the best piece of technology was the Blue Force tracker, right? Like that was like the creme de la creme of technology back then. Was like you had this like screen that showed you where other platoons were and where other assets were, and you thought you were like you were in God mode and you understood everything. Looking back on that, it was kind of comical because that was just the bare minimum of what you needed, right? You could barely move, you could barely shoot, you could barely communicate kind of across the spectrum. And I think now, I mean, the battlefield is full of sensors, it's full of data, it's full of the complexity that the modern world has kind of built. I think as you're seeing a variety of different systems being built, but a variety of different sensors being built, everybody's kind of thinking about this data-centric warfare and how data is this strategic resource that has to be controlled, managed, and understood. I think there's been a lot of efforts kind of across the DoD and the government to be data aware and to understand that data, if you have data and you're using it correctly, you could have kind of that decision advantage, if you will, kind of across all domains. And I think everyone's trying to think about how do we frame it and how do we apply technology to it. I think kind of this Gen AI kind of wave of excitement has been really exciting in the text field and the video field and some audio. But I think as we start to think about how do all these different AI fields start to play in the modern battlefield, how do we start to think about sensor data? How do we start thinking about the radio frequency data? How do we start thinking about the complexity of the volume, veracity, visualization of these data sets kind of in real time, right? Because I think I made this comment 2 days ago. I said the RF spectrum is essentially like watching a Netflix movie every 2 seconds. The amount of volume that you're generating
Good way to think about that.
Trying to analyze is just so massive. And to most commanders on the battlefield, they can't comprehend the magnitude. And that's just one sensor. We're ingesting hundreds of sensors at one time. And I think that is really kind of where like, hey, where do we turn for help? And I think it's really kind of in this AI space. And I think that's really the excitement that everybody wants to figure out how to employ it, how to point it at the hardest and challenging problems. And I think that's where really the combination of software and AI and algorithmic warfare really combine to then get to the end user for action, right? Because all of us want action. We don't want to be analysts and sitting in a jock in some sort of skiff. Like we want it at the edge. We want it now. We want it to be at the decision edge to make the difference.
Yeah, and I think that when I hear about sort of taking your point on sort of the spectrum complexity and just like not only how vibrant or voluminous sort of single streams of spectrum are, but also the complexity of the contested nature of it. And I juxtapose that with Tyler's perspective and insight on the increasing complexity between partners and allies. And as more tools are coming in without sort of interoperability, and then bring that in, getting to my question on you're talking about, hey, we want capability, we want it at the edge. As a student of the good old effects-based operations, right? Like we want to be able to generate effects. I mean, how are you? And Kev, I'll start with you on this one. Like as a product guy now, especially sort of on the outside, looking at a problem like this with data type, data source, sensor, multi-layer, multi-level security sort of issues, access issues, right? Like load, like what can I actually pull back from a latency bandwidth standpoint? How do you then think about what a capability needs to look like? It's sort of like a base. And then Tyler, I'll turn to you after he says it. I want to hear your perspective on how do we take some of those like cutting edge, best of breed capabilities and allow the output to be something that generates a positive effect across the broader multinational force.
Yeah, I'll jump in on that one, Tyler. I think for the longest time we saw kind of the business world, the Apple iOS kind of take charge, and everyone was so enthralled with my smartphone and how technology is enabling my life. And as soon as we badged in and we got into the skiff, everyone was like, "Where's that technology? Right? Like, where is it? Like, why
So you
are we
logged
building
into like
a
Windows 95? Yeah.
95, right?" And I think like there's kind of this desire for everyone to have that type of technology on the modern battlefield, and I think that is really kind of the where everybody wants to go inside of in the DoD. And I think, as we look at, a attritable system, attritable sensors, how do we make, legacy hardware into modern software systems? And I think really software kind of as a class of technologies can really, bring, a 10-year-old piece of kit up to today's specs that a soldier wants like in their hands right now. And I think, that applies kind of at scale across multiple enterprises. But I really think, for a long, long time, we've been thinking about kind of the use case at the brigade or the division or the corps level, kind of mass user adoption of some of those software types. But I think as we get further along in this journey, I think we need to empower down to really the people that are making the decisions kind of in the moment. And I think, we brought up Blue Force Tracker, but that thing enabled action. It enabled, people on the ground making hard decisions in the fight, make those different decision advantaged decisions. So I think that's a big thing for me. And I think the flexibility, the usability, and the interoperability kind of across that NATO force, I think is essential to how we think about kind of the evolution of these different software systems.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, the pushing it down and making it consumable, right? And allowing it to empower, enable, enhance, refine, pick your sort of action word there. A commander or, an operator's ability to draw an insight, make a decision is paramount. Tyler, how are you seeing, at a policy level, but also even just like at a practical level, us starting to think about, hey, we've got to be able to push that down and have some modicum of like shared situational awareness that can't just be in like a CJOC or something, right? Like it's got to be down on the ground. And we opened with the joke about me on a mountain with a cell phone. Like that's how I called the Brits. Like that's how I talked to the Czechs. Like none of my kit talked to the folks on the next ridgeline who like I really needed to share information with. How are you seeing that as you're up in there, like on the ground in these host nation countries now?
Yeah, I mean, so I think I'll start with it's been a struggle, and as I kind of transitioned to what I was going to research for the War College, it really was kind of a thorn in my side of, man, we are seeing this, whether we want to call it an evolution or revolution in technology. And there's a huge risk right now that we could be leaving allies and partners behind as the industrial base and the technology base of the United States can outperform and outspend a lot of our allies and partners. It kind of really hit me, man. How do we fix this, or at least make sure that we're aware enough as we're going through this technology procurement that we've taken this all into account? So I kind of went back and looked at some of the U.S. laws and codes, and guess what? There's a U.S. law on the books that says, hey, to the maximum extent feasible, our equipment and technologies will be interoperable with allies and partners. And again, I'm paraphrasing a little bit there. And kind of some of the insight of some of my research and some of my recommendations, that it should be to the maximum extent feasible, but likely erring towards multinational and international interoperability. Because I think we've all come to the realization that we're not going to go out the next war alone. We're going to be going at it with allies and partners. We have to. And as we kind of potentially prepare for that war in 2030 or the war in 2040, as we've heard some leaders say, how do we make sure that we have the force package there that's going to ensure that we're successful in the first battle of the next war, and we're not learning lessons immediately. And so again, as you look at NATO interoperability, the human, the procedural, the technical domain, again, a lot of stuff that we're talking about in the technical domain. And Tyler, as you said, I mean, the human domain will always persevere. we're always going to get it to a point where we're going to have that lieutenant that will crawl to the furthest hilltop to make radio comms, but does it have to be that way? And are these technology solutions out there to facilitate these operations? And so again, I think we have to be better. I think we have to be better early on in the procurement cycle when we're laying out the specs of like, hey, yeah, this has to meet these NATO STANAGs, or this equipment must fulfill these standards that the NATO STANAGs have outlined. And some of it for allies and partners is just, hey, we're going to acknowledge that there's NATO STANAGs, and STANAG being a standardization agreement that NATO allies and partners have agreed upon. And we're just going to vote on them so that across the alliance, we know where each of these members stand. And so some of it is internal to NATO. Some of it is internal to the U.S. procurement system. But again, to me, it should be baselined. And hey, we realize that we're going to be fighting with allies and partners. And so as we procure, as we design, I believe, again, personal opinion, it must start with how are we going to make sure that this is interoperable with allies and partners, both as we look forward, but then also ensuring that we've got some backwards compatibility as well, knowing that we will go through generational change on a lot of this equipment. But yeah, that's some of my 2 cents on that.
No, I love it. And I'll say the thing I think sort of intersects with both of those is the last topic I sort of want to take us through, and then I'll do the last structure here, is cognitive load, right? I think cognitive load is talked about a lot. I think we, like the royal we, do it a little bit of a disservice, and we focus on like the guy hitting a door who's, got a monocle, and you're like, Jesus Christ, it's Jason Bourne. When like in reality, it can just as easily be the targeter that's on a stick in a jock. It can be a commander at echelons above that is having to think about resource decisions and allocation and prioritization. And Tyler, using your framework there, it can also be those international partners or those companies who are trying to deliver and understand what standards do I have to adhere to? When do I need to be in this STIG or STANAG or that STIG or STANAG? How are you guys seeing that, one, being talked about, and then two, sort of being a tenet or a principle of, build or delivery? And we'll go Kevin and Tyler.
Yeah, when my last role as the chief data officer, that was kind of a daily debate was, do we build or do we buy? Right. And in a lot of the case, we had great engineers that were capable of doing a lot of building. But a lot of those networks are pretty restrictive on how you build and what you can deliver in the time and space. What we liked on the build side was we got that constant iteration with the end user. Every week we get updates on how it looks, how it feels, how it operates, and how it's, adding value to the mission. From the buy standpoint, the buy was a little easier because we just kind of threw it over the fence and tried to integrate. I think there's a gap there though of when we do buy something, it's hard to pivot from that known point, right? You buy it, you own it, you live with it, and every single customer that I had on the soft side would want to modify and change that 5 to 10%. And we'd say, well, that's an extra mil, 2 mil, 3 mil, you add it up. But they said, well, I gotta have that last bit of functionality. And we'd say, well, we should have bought it, or we should have built it. Sorry. And I think that was really kind of that hard balancing act of, it's really good that you can buy this, but what about that little functionality? So what we did on our team was we built in functionality to try to get to the requirement earlier to influence the actual buy function to get it to the point that we could use it right off the shelf. And so I think that balance of buy and build is extremely tough, but I think a really critical component of thinking about those things earlier that have downstream effects all day long once you make that decision. And those decisions are really expensive if you don't think about them up front in the requirements process. And so that was a lot of the hand wringing that we did, but I think made huge impacts as we needed to own certain aspects of the mission And I think the collaboration piece between government and industry is critical, because you can really shape and add a lot of functionality if you can do things right. We believe that creatives were a really helpful way to bring the commercial sector into the government in a really responsible way, that we had shared mission space. And then a little bit of investment goes a long way as you try and build these relationships with these commercial companies, because you give great value, you give great feedback, and then they can pivot and work that with other customer bases as they need to. So I think that collaboration piece was critical, and then being open to exposing a little bit of mission and exposing a little bit of dependency on third-party commercial vendors, I think is okay. But you still got to own it as the government, and really kind of take that leadership position to continue to evolve and iterate on technology in the government.
Yeah, I love that. I think the make versus buy, and it's the challenge commercially of like a PM or a product owner of, hey, do you need this? Do you want this? Is this critical for functionality? Like, we talk about it all the time, sort of what's above, on, or below the cut line. And then that drives trade space. Tyler, sort of from your standpoint there, in that international allies, partners, sort of all of that, how are you guys thinking about and sort of maybe accounting for cognitive load, especially as we get into like, real sort of operational and strategic decision making?
Yeah, I think real quick is that I think as Kevin was talking, it spurred a couple things. I think one of the good things that we have been seeing is that leaders now, with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, kind of seizing some of that momentum to kind of push the boundary on authorities and policies, and saying, okay, hey, is this way, and can we not share this because of a policy or authority, and who do I need to talk to get that authority to kind of overcome some of these barriers that we've been seeing. And so I think there's been some goodness there, especially in Europe, in Fifth Corps and the 56th Artillery Command, Theater Artillery Command over there, just doing some amazing things at advancing some of what we can do with allies and partners the proper and legal way, but pushing it towards interoperability. I do believe at the time we are getting to saturation points when it comes to the amount of information, especially at the tactical level, that is being put on the backs of some of those leaders. And so again, in Hohenfels, Germany at JMRC, you swap leaders at a combat training center on purpose, so that, lack of sleep, a lot of information, and thinking not for going up against you. But my concern is, with all these different sensors coming in, where do we ensure that we offload onto technology? You can't offload those critical decisions and responsibilities that come with leaders, especially when it comes down to law of armed conflict, international humanitarian law. That's all stuff that leaders still have to make decisions on. But at what point can we help digest some of that information? And some of the things we've been talking about more recently is how do you get to the saturation of sensors out there, and so that with all these sensors you can get to an optimized shooter on the battlefield. And again, something that we may need eventually some help on. I think right now we're still in a space where the leaders on the battlefield can make those decisions. But I think as we look forward, we quickly get to a point where there's just so much information coming in. Staffs can only do so much to help leader make those proper decisions on the battlefield. So we're close. And again, then you get to a denied environment, and you're back to just acetate and markers, and then it's an easier problem set. And so again, where on the spectrum are we fighting is going to be a very interesting place to be. But man, and I'll steal something from the Field Artillery Commandant that I always says, but man, what a relevant, exciting time. One, to be a red leg for me, but then to be in the technology sector as we look at the next battlefield. Man, it's exciting and scary sometimes at the same time.
Yeah, I think your point on denied versus accessible in terms of spectrum. I think us even presuming we have an idea of what the deck is going to look like when we're in whatever the next sort of conflict um, is something that history has shown us, we won't have control of. And it's that the need to continue to build flexible, adaptive, sort of agile leaders and operators. One, I want to thank you guys both for taking some time. This is, like I said, super nostalgic one. But you guys have had awesome careers and have touched so many relevant aspects of what the leaders of tomorrow, that next generation up, are going to be faced with. So I want to leave with one last question for each of you is, as we look across interoperability and sensors and data overload and technology versus, digital versus analog and partners and allies, it's the king for a day question. So you've got sort of like, your magic wand, you can wave it and you can change something or make something happen. And you don't have to caveat like, hey, it would be required 1, 2, and 3. Like your intent is just manifested. What is that one thing and why? And we'll go in opposite order than we started. We'll go Kev first, and then we'll finish with Tyler.
Wow, that is a great question. I have a handful, but I think I'm just going to go with the something that the three of us can really fall back on is really train as you fight, right? And I'm going to get there in my explanation, but I think growing up with you two on the field of friendly strife, being goalies, we kind of prided ourselves on this. You train as you fight. You come to practice ready to freaking lay out and do everything you can to become the best goalkeeper, for the Army team. And I think that grit that we displayed on the soccer field, I think has applied to not just my operational time in the Army, but really in the technology field and data and software development and AI. And I think, as we think of units, going out and exercising these really complex things like spectrum dominance, like sensor integration, like cognitive load, I think they got to bring it every time they go out there and train like they're gonna fight, right? I don't know if looking back at the Russian-Ukraine conflict, I think a lot of people weren't really ready for that, and they've had to learn really quickly to the point of today's fight. But I think as DoD units go out there, they need to bring the tech, they need to bring the partnerships, they need to bring everything that they're gonna want or need and try to get after it in exercises to be able to then quickly display that when we do have to have a conflict in the near future, in the far future, hopefully. So I would say if we can train as we fight and we can be collaborative with partners and we could make everyone a little bit smarter on the technology front, whether that's data literacy or whether that's deep fires or whether that's how to actually do the thing we need to do across every military function and domain. I think to elevate the common soldier, common airman, common Marine, I think is really important as we grow as the DoD and have to continue to evolve and be ready for the next fight. So I would say, train as you fight. I love that mentality of crawl, walk, run. We need to be always crawling. We need to be constantly be energetic for the next piece of tech and not be scared of these things like AI. And I think like we need to be ready for that next challenge and always be pushing the limits of what tech can do for us to enable the best fighting military in the world.
Yeah, dude, I love that. And I'll say as somebody who is unable to shake that train as you fight from a goalie standpoint, who's now blown out both elbows in beer league soccer as a goalie, very much resonates. So Tyler, take us home, brother.
Yeah, so I think with me, and again, putting kind of my NATO allies and partners hat back on, it's getting to day zero interoperability. And what I mean by day zero interoperability is I should be able to stand next to an ally, we both turn on our radios and we talk immediately. It shouldn't take weeks, months, years of exercise planning and everything else to ensure that we can do the basics. That should be built in to our systems, both at the national and alliance perspective. And again, day zero interoperability, because again, we're not guaranteed weeks, months, and years to know when the next fight is coming our way. And so we do need to be ready tomorrow. And taking a Korean phrase, we have to be ready to fight tonight. And we get there with day zero interoperability. We're not there right now. We've made some amazing strides here recently. Again, seizing some of the momentum based off of what we've been seeing going on around the globe. But from communications, mission command, fires, being able to come up with allies and partners immediately and fight so that we're not spilling first blood on the battlefield, and we're making sure that the enemy's spilling his first blood is where we want to be. Again, day zero interoperability. And I think for both of you, I think we'd be pleased to hear that the pit is still alive. I talked to a recent grad who was overseas just a couple nights ago on the soccer team chat, and he fully knew what the pit was and the intent behind the pit. And it does make me go back and think about some of those guys that we grew up with, right? The Springers, the Soikas, the Millers, Wes Millers, Myers, Larrabees, Casey Evans, Landgrass, and then of course Kevin Smith, who we always remember, who gave his life in Iraq, and just how special that time in the pit and on the Army soccer field, the Iron Leagues, for those of us who suffered down near the railroad tracks for a couple of years. Again, how much of that gets carried forward into what we've done. It's amazing. It's just seeing this group do so many amazing things here over the last 20 plus years. And yeah, Tyler, thanks for having us on, man. It's been great.
Amen, brothers. And I'll leave it with, recently, a week ago, spent an evening watching USA soccer game with like 4 generations of Army soccer folks. Patty Clancy's in there. Lloyd was in there. Right. And it's just the magic of, and like I said, you had folks from the 80s, folks from the 90s, retired generals, folks who got out as captains, everything in between. It's a pretty cool a brotherhood to be part of. So grateful that you guys had included me in that brotherhood. And thanks for stopping by today, guys. This was rad.
Yeah, thanks, Tyler. Thanks for having us, man. It's been fun.
Boom. Thanks, everybody.